welcome now to Matthew and Victoria. Hello.
Hi.
Hello, hi.
How are we doing?
Great.
Fine, thank you. Good to be here.
New book, exciting times.
Mm-hmm.
So you will be hearing from Matthew and Victoria properly in about 15 to 17 minutes time. Before we get there, there's a few things we need to get through. The first thing we need to discuss is code of conduct. The short version is try to be nice to each other. The webinars are exactly the same as physical events. We don't tolerate sexism, racism, or anything like that. My colleague Carla will now drop in the link to the full code of conduct. You can read it if you would like to. You can also copy it or use it if you need a code of conduct for your events, whether they're online or physical. We will also be getting into, or later on, we'll be getting into the following. First of all, some announcements. This is stuff that's coming up, new content, new webinars, things that you need to know about. We have a section, what the fuck is the gossip? Now, usually I've got two wingmen, Ian Mile and Adrian Moa. Adrian, Ian, welcome.
Oh, hey.
Hello.
Wasn't
Hello.
expecting that. Okay.
You were not expecting that. This is live TV, baby.
Yeah, sure.
We practiced this. We've practiced this earlier.
It's all right. I'm just dealing with a sick dog at the same time.
Oh, the poor dog. How are you, Adrian?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah, I can see you've had a haircut, which means you must have done that yourself.
Yeah, my wife did it. She did okay. I mean, I have to like kind of try and keep it to the side so you can't see the squint bits. But
Wow, this is good. And I can see Ian Mile also looks like he's had a haircut. Hello, Ian.
Hello. I fired my wife and got my daughters to do it. She did a much better job.
There's been a change of staff in the Mile family. Very good. Okay, gentlemen, it's great to have you back, and we all look forward to your section later. What the fuck is the goss? And then, as we usually do, I'll just spend about 5 minutes putting into context internal tech conferences, which is really what we're here to talk about today, in the context of our broader work and the other webinars that we've been doing. This is not about what I have to say. It's really about what Matthew and Victoria have to say. So this is really just a bit of context setting, and then we'll be straight into Victoria and Matthew's talk. We leave lots of time at the end for questions. If you need to get off to your next meeting, of course, just drop out, but there's lots of time for questions and for discussions and for comments. Once Matthew and Victoria is speaking, I will monitor the Zoom channel, the Zoom chat, along with Carla, and we'll pick out questions so that when the talk comes to an end, we've got something to discuss. Right. Are there any questions? Because if there aren't, now is the time we are about to proceed. Carla, did I miss anything?
Yeah, I would like to share that we are experimenting also with the live captioning by Zoom. So if you click on the live transcript that should be at the bottom of your window, you can actually see the transcript of this of what we are saying live, which is very, very exciting because we can get even different audience and be more accessible. Yeah,
exactly. So for those people whose first language is not English, or for those people who are hard of hearing or deaf, this is something that can help them to join the webinars or join in the webinars with us. Good innovation, that good idea for switching that on. Anything else, Carla?
And we are recording, just FYI. If anybody has any problem with the recording, we can blur their faces or the names, etc. So yeah, they just need to drop us a line. And that's it, we can start.
We can start. Okay, a few announcements. I'm gonna get through these quite quickly. The next What the Fucking Hell that I'll be hosting is with Google and with Nathan. We're gonna be talking about site reliability engineering, which is best described as a set of practices that allow your systems to stay up in production. But surprise, surprise, this cannot be done without a certain culture and a certain mindset. We're all pretty excited to have Nathan on. And Google, I've heard, are very delighted to be working with a leader in cloud native, namely Container Solutions. So it could be nice for them. The next announcement, what the fuck are cloud native patterns? For those of you who have been here before, you will know that we wrote a book, but I always say the same thing. This is the book. You don't have to buy the book because you can download all the instructions to the patterns and the cloud native workshop on our website. But we will be running this event and it's really cool. If you're at the end of your cloud native journey, the patterns, each of which appear on these cards, you know, the patterns you'll use might be around SRE, chaos engineering and stuff like that. If you're at the beginning of your journey, you might be plotting something different, namely how to get executive buy-in and how to do vision first. There's limited spaces to this one, so if you want to go to it, register now. And finally, there's a new version of the maturity matrix documents. It's really nice, it's really visual. Download that, and basically you've got everything you need then to begin to do a cloud native transformation, or at least to think about it. Right, world news, here we go. This is my new feature. Let me know whether this works or not. So as you know, in the United Kingdom currently, we have new lockdown restrictions. Now, in order to relate to working class parents, Matthew Hancock, our health secretary, has taken to giving the press conferences from his very modest house and garden. Over in the United States, for the 8th day in a row, President Joe Biden is told that yes, he is the president, and no, this isn't a dream. And finally, as the lockdown's rules for worship change, there is a rush amongst the clergy to get the best spot at church. This was my favorite. If you're wondering where I get these images from, I steal them all from the Cloud Native Twitter stream, which pops up on my telephone. I really like this section, but I don't know if it works. Let me know what you think. And without any more fanning around, it's time for the gossip. Today, we'll be talking about Amazon, Intel are rehiring, Toyota batteries, hedge funds going bankrupt. What a shame. And of course, pseudo judo. Before we get to that, massive shout out to Justin. Many people on this webinar will know who Justin McCormack is. He's a top guy, works at Docker, just been promoted to the CTO position. This is a huge win for Docker, I think. He's a really generous member of the community, loves to share, has always been a very kind mentor to me and somebody who you can always speak to and have a pint with. Right, what's going on with Amazon, Adrian and Ian?
So, yeah, this is a rumbling story. So Amazon, as many will know, now have a cloud service based on Elasticsearch. And they got into a bit of a fight with Elastic because Elastic didn't like the way they basically took over their market share. They stole their market share effectively by offering a service. So Elastic got angry and changed their open source license to a license which I wasn't aware, but is not recognized by the open source initiative. So in response, Amazon have now forked and open sourced Elastic. So now the question is, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? We all know that open source plus support contract is the new vendor lock-in. So maybe Elastic are the bad guys and Amazon are the good guys, but that feels wrong, doesn't it? Saying Amazon are the good guys. So there's a couple of good articles on this to look at. First is Amazon's justification for their actions. It's quite aggressive tone, and InfoQ is the more balanced look at the debate.
And of course, did the Register publish anything?
Yeah, the Register got stuff on it as well, but I didn't go down that road.
Your best bet, if you want a very controversial take on that, is surely the Register. All right, and now Intel are rehiring retired architects. What's this one about, lads?
So this caught my eye. It was essentially Intel have. There's a guy who very long-standing and respected architect at Intel, retired presumably on his pots of cash. Said he was very comfortable in retirement and happy in retirement, but has been brought back coincidentally with an old timer at Intel taking the helm. And with the M1 causing real waves in the chip community, there's a guess that Intel have something pretty serious coming down the pipe. Apparently what he's working on won't be known for a few years, but it's fun to speculate.
There's been some brilliant articles. The new CEO is ex-Intel, but he was at VMware, of course. And there's been some brilliant speculation as to what Intel will do next, because they're being outpaced in manufacturing, of course, by their Asian rivals. Next one.
So another bit of hardware news. I saw that Toyota announced a battery that claims to go 500 kilometers in one charge and take 10 minutes to recharge. Usual marketing disclaimers, but they claim that this is going to be properly unveiled next year. I found out from reading around this that Toyota have over 1,000 patents on solid state batteries, the most in the world. And the Japanese government is putting a fund together of $20 billion to support decarbonization technology.
Wow.
So I think Musk has got a bit of a fight on his hands. Another thing I found out is that the Chinese Energy Development Fund is spending $153 million into R&D of solid state batteries, lasting 3 years, starting from 2021. So big money going into this.
And of course, it's a new thing, isn't it? Because if we've got renewable power, we need a way to store that when the sun's not shining. Now, GameStop, hedge funds, what's going on here?
Right, you started with a more complicated one. That's all right. This is a pretty crazy story. There's like a lot of different takes on it because there's a lot of interesting cultural things that come up from it. A lot of you are probably aware. Basically, these hedge funds shorted GameStop. So they were basically betting that the stock price would go down. So they borrowed stock effectively, immediately sold it. And then they actually published articles, I believe, which makes me question the legality of that. But they published articles that basically made the stock price go down further. They buy the stock back at lower rate and then sell it back to the original to make a profit. Or return it to the original, but make a profit anyway. Now, and that's probably a really bad explanation of shorting, but let's just go with it. There's a Reddit community called Wall Street Bets. They figured out that several hedge funds had a short position on GameStop, and they thought, well, let's have them if you like, and they started buying GameStop stock, and enough of them started buying that the stock price started going up quite a lot. And then the problem is the hedge fund have to buy back the stock to return it to the original owner, and so they were forced to buy at inflated levels, and it went up even further. And they were making losses of like billions. Like literally, hedge funds have gone bust because they've been losing billions on this. And some people are loving it. Some people probably saw Elon Musk weighing in and tweeting GameStonk, and that's because he has a big problem with hedge funds because they screw with the Tesla price all the time. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing, or one of the interesting points, is that the hedge funds want to bring in regulation. They want to say, this is all caused by people trading on Robinhood in the public. But, it's the public making money. It's the first time the public makes money from finance. Suddenly, hedge funds have a problem.
And they want to regulate. They want to be regulated.
Well, they want the SEC or whatever it's called to step in and say, okay, we're halting trading while people figure out their situations. Yeah. But that's unfair on the public. So it's a weird one.
Good story. Good story. We'll keep our eyes on that one, not least because it's causing a lot of people to sort of. It's a bit like reality TV, isn't it? People are following that quite intently. Yeah,
I'll maybe copying a couple of Twitter links because there's some fascinating takes on it.
Cool. Well, when you finish chatting, Adrian, you can drop them in for people to follow. Okay, what's going on with sudo? Is this true? Is there a vulnerability?
Yeah, it's a big one. So please update your sudo. That's a major takeaway. Yet again, it was a buffer heap overflow that caused it. Because of course, sudo is written in C. I was actually alerted to this from Justin Cormack that we were talking about earlier. So on his Twitter feed, he's quite a good person to follow on Twitter if you like security stuff. And he quite rightly points out that, we should really think about rewriting tools like these in something like Rust, which, gets rid of a certain class. It doesn't fix every problem, doesn't fix all your security problems, but it does get rid of a category, especially the sort of heap and buffer overflow ones, which were like this one. Right. But the big takeaway is please update sudo.
Please update sudo. Okay, you heard it here first, probably not first, but you've heard it here, that's for sure. Okay, right. Thank you so much for the updates on the news, and thank you for giving me a few moments to share our updates on what's coming up. We're about to bring on Victoria and Matthew. Before we do that, I've just got a few more minutes where I'd like to talk about how we see cloud native and what we think the relationship is between cloud native in its totality and internal tech conferences. So this is in a way an introduction and a build up to what's going to come from Matthew and Victoria in a moment. Okay, so most of you realize, or most of us realize, cloud native is at least about technologies to some extent, Kubernetes, containers, etc., etc. But every guest that we've ever had on the show also tells us it's mainly about culture, the way you act, the way you think, the way you be. And of course, cultures have got attached to them values. And so you could pick a number of random values if you like from Cloud Native. They would include distributed decision making. So decisions don't go all the way back up to the boss for sign off, but when you're doing Cloud Native properly, lots of people have got decision making powers, whether they're engineers or whether they're middle managers or team leads. And of course, Cloud Native values innovation, safety, and especially collaboration, which we're about to come back to. So if you look at the maturity matrix, those values are really to do with culture. And right there in plain letters is this collaborative element. The point is, you cannot see Cloud Native as anything but a whole system of product development, and especially digital product development. And what we say is you cannot disintegrate this. You cannot take Kubernetes and a virtual machine and say, well, now we're Cloud Native, because you're not, because you won't see the results and you won't act like a Cloud Native company would act. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from my own work and my own research is that this stuff simply cannot be disintegrated. When I speak to people who don't work in our field, I often tell the story of King Solomon and the baby. And most of you will remember this story from your childhood. Maybe you heard it at Sunday school or something like that. The story goes something like this. Two women live in a communal house with their children and their husbands. They've both got babies. One of the babies, unfortunately, dies. In a fit of grief, both mums claim the remaining baby to be theirs, and nobody knows who's telling the truth. So eventually this makes its way to the court of King Solomon, and they still cannot agree whose baby this baby is. So Solomon says, well, I've got an ingenious solution. Let's just chop the baby in half, and you can have half each. Now in the picture, you see the surviving toddler, lifted up by his leg, and the master at arms about to swing his sword, chopping the baby in half. And of course, what happens is, in the story, of course, one of the ladies says, yes, sure, I'll be happy with half a baby. And the other one says, well, no, I'm not happy at all. She can have it. She can keep the baby. And of course, this is how Solomon realizes that only the mother would be happy to let give a child up in order for it to survive. This is a bit of a brutal story, actually. It's a bit of a brutal image. I did find an alternative image, which is from History in Lego. Now, this is less blood-curdling, but the two mothers in this picture have both got bikinis on. So, it's a bit more sexist and probably a bit less historically accurate. But nevertheless, the moral of the story is really this. Cloud Native is an integrated set of activities, and it's absolutely a value system. If you're not collaborative and innovative, you will never be able to work in a Cloud Native setup. And with that in mind, we think of leadership as being a process by which values are converted. You're changing people's way of thinking and way of looking at the world. How do we do that? Well, we've got one-on-ones, we've got training and coaching, all the management stuff as usual, but we've also got internal tech conferences. I showed you earlier the Cloud Native patent cards. Every single company that we've worked with who does Cloud Native right has a different way of organizing, and nearly all of them use widespread or wide open, in the sense that they're open to the whole company, tech conferences. So this is one mechanism by which we collaborate, by which we create context and shared understanding. It destroys the hierarchy. So when you see Cloud Native as a system of values, and when you think of leadership as value conversion, then that takes us directly to internal tech conferences as a really powerful tool for the leader and the manager to use. And that is my introduction to Matthew and Victoria. So I would like to ask everybody now to unmute their microphones and give a round of applause to our two guests, who are this week, Victoria and Matthew, to talk about internal tech conferences. Hello.
Hi.
Let me stop sharing. Welcome. Hello. Where are you? Oh my God, are the guests here? Carla, tell us the guests are here.
Yeah, we're here.
Oh, we're there.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Thank you. It's so hello everyone, and thank you, Jamie, for inviting us to join you. We are, as Matthew said earlier, really happy to be here. So that was a really nice lead up, and it works quite well. So we'll talk a bit about how to boost cross-team learning as an alternative to big training course learning and engagement using internal tech conferences. So we'll talk for a bit, and then if anyone's got any questions for us at the end, hopefully there'll be some time and we'll be happy to answer them. Before we go into, so yeah, in terms of what we'll talk about, so there's 4 parts to it. We want to share with you what's so great about internal tech conferences, how to create a successful one, and some things that we've specifically learned over the past year about online conferences, which that's new stuff in terms of kind of fresh thinking, because it's obviously going to be useful for some time to come. Before we go into that, who are we? I'm the Director of Delivery for internal products at Financial Times, where we've run several of these events, learning lots along the way. And Matthew, he'll say hello in a minute, is co-author of the book and also the Director and Head of Consulting at Conflux. He's also run loads of internal tech conferences over the years, as well as a very successful pipeline conference. One more person to introduce, because no presentation or talk is complete without a cat. It's what the internet's invented for. So it's just a gratuitous photo of my adorable new co-worker. Co-worker has taken over my home. So I'm now doing this from a room which is not where I planned to, but we're all adapting to the space around us, and that's what the current times are all about. So over to Matthew to tell you more about what we're going to say.
Right, so let me just share my screen and I'll find the right window, which would help. Here we go. Share. So it should say, what is an internal tech conference? If it looks like something different, then shout out. Here we go. So this is the definition from our book out on page 2, as it happens. An internal tech conference is a technology conference run by and for the staff of a single organization. So this is really like a shared celebration and examination of the current practices and approaches within the organization, accelerating learning at a time of rapid technological change. And that fits through to what Jamie was saying just a few minutes ago. It helps us with things like distributed decision-making, helps with collaboration, innovation, and safety, those 4 things that Jamie shared. So let's look into a little bit more detail about why we should run an internal tech conference. The first thing is to connect people. And particularly in the situation that we find ourselves in now, this kind of pandemic, remote first world. But it's not just about the pandemic. The remote first world is here to stay. Some companies now specify just a time zone for their location criteria for hiring people. They don't care which country they're in. It's just, roughly speaking, are you roughly in the right time zone to be able to collaborate with other people at that particular time of day? So this kind of remote first thing is not going to go away anytime soon. We cannot assume that people are going to meet each other in person in the office by the coffee machine or by the water cooler. So we have to sort of be more deliberate about how we're going to bring people together, particularly for sharing knowledge and accelerating learning. The speed of change and the speed of delivery is very high in many organizations, particularly those that have adopted or adopting cloud native ways of working. And often we're doing kind of really amazing things or really difficult things, but we sort of forget. So it's good to have time to reflect and share and learn and celebrate this stuff. So an internal tech conference is kind of a little bit like an organization-wide retrospective session, but a bit more fun. We need to accelerate learning, and this is becoming increasingly more important. The speed of change around us and also within our organizations is actually increasing. So technology is changing incredibly quickly due to kind of network effects, industrialization of previously bespoke products. I know that Jamie and Simon Wardley talked recently. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go and have a look at that webinar. And just more generally increasing computing power. We heard today it's about battery technology from Toyota. the cost of electricity will be kind of going down in the sense that we'll be able to get it almost for free from the sun. This really changes the dynamics, the industrial dynamics around kind of computing power, what we can expect our computers to do. At the same time, the climate is changing, and that's driving changes in markets and people's livelihoods and all sorts of stuff. And there's all the geopolitical change as well, things like changing trading relationships, particularly for me in the UK, like Brexit. But these also drive innovation, as well as causing problems and embargoes and lots of stuff. So all of this stuff is, the speed of change in all of these things is not going to slow down anytime soon. And to help deal with this kind of continuous change, organizations need to adopt new technologies and practices to learn how to apply existing practices and technologies to new situations. And fundamentally, we should expect to work towards a kind of eventual consistency of practices and ways of working and a sense of what good looks like. So this is very specifically a good approach for large-scale complex software systems, but we can do it as well within our organizations. So we need to expect ideas to spread kind of unevenly and different parts of the organization at different speeds, and eventually we kind of converge on some really good practices. But it's not a good thing to try and push a particular idea across the entire organization at the same time. That's not good from a technology point of view, and we know it's not good from an organizational point of view. An internal tech conference also allows us to see the variety of problems and solutions together and gain an awareness of some potential things that we might need to avoid, potential things that we might need to try in order to fix some problems. So we're bringing to the surface the best approaches so that other people inside our organization can adopt them or try them out. So what makes a good internal tech conference? These are some pointers now. Victoria, in a few moments, is going to go into much more detail, but here are 4 pointers. The first thing is to make sure the conference is well planned. Generally speaking, you're going to need about 6 months to plan a conference. Certainly, if it's a physical in-person conference, 6 months is a minimum. But even for an online conference, you're going to need many months. It's not just something you can pull together in a couple of days or in a couple of weeks. Don't expect things are going to work. Things will fail. Don't gamble. Mitigate likely problems. Network connectivity, computers breaking, power going off, people being sick, the dog eating your laptop power supply, whatever it is. Like, mitigate these things. These things will happen. And you've got plenty of time to work out what to do when these things go wrong. So you ask yourself, what would happen if this thing breaks? What would happen if this thing's not available? So techniques that we've kind of learned from building software systems, apply that to the event as well. Like, just challenge what happens when this thing is not available or when it breaks. And make sure you spend your money wisely, because these things cost some money to put on. An online conference doesn't necessarily cost as much as a physical conference. You don't have to pay for all the food necessarily or the venue, but it'll still certainly need people's time invested in it. Make sure the conference is well promoted. Take some time to persuade and entice people to come to the conference. So persuade people to speak and persuade people to attend, so that you get a buzz when the event happens. It's actually really handy to have people in the organizing team for the event, for the conference, having people in the organizing team that are good at promotion. So they might be in the marketing department, or they might do something in their kind of personal life. They might be like an events promoter, or do some comedy stand-up or something like that. Have a few of those people in the organizing team too. Make sure the event itself is well executed. And to do that, you should rehearse the flow. Practice what happens when one speaker stops and the next one starts. Practice what happens when you go into a little kind of break between the sessions. Just rehearse this stuff. You don't need to take the full time, but you're going to check the kind of segue, the transitions between the different states. Crucially, mentor the speakers. So one consistent message from the book, Internal Tech Conferences, so that there's some case studies in here that we go through, and a consistent message for success in an internal tech conference is to work with speakers to help them become better at defining their talk, defining the kind of the takeaway points from their talk, writing the slides, delivering the talk itself. Put some time in to mentor these speakers. They might need some coaching, in particular speaking techniques. And don't forget that speaking in a large physical room is actually quite difficult, quite different from speaking online into a webcam like I'm doing now. There are different techniques. So put the effort into supporting and guiding those speakers so that they can be as confident and kind of appealing as possible when they're actually doing the talk. And then after the event, make sure the conference itself is well reported. So celebrate the success that happened during the conference. Find out from people what they got from the conference, find out some of the outcomes, some of the learning that took place, some of the kind of light bulb moments, some of the kind of wow, did it moments that happened as people connected and realized things that they hadn't realized before, and celebrate that either just internally or maybe do some public blog posts or some articles, some interviews, this kind of thing. Celebrate it. That becomes part of the return on investment pitch for the next time you run one of these events. So now it's over to Victoria for some more details.
Yeah. Okay. Do you still see the slides? What are the key success criteria?
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So yes. So whilst every conference is different, there are some things that you're going to want to get right if you're going to have a successful event that has a lasting impact. The first one is you want to make sure that you have a clear goal, know why you're doing this, because then you can shape it accordingly. You may be trying to achieve multiple things with your event, but consider your main outcome and then you can work out what you're going to do from there. So, for example, is your goal about promoting and enabling learning? Is it about bringing industry-wide thinking into the broader workspace? If that's the case, this might favour some full-length talks and workshops where you can really get into the topic, into some topics. The first FT event, the Financial Times event, was triggered by the relatively small number of people who went to conferences, realising that what they were hearing was a lot of validation of the knowledge and understanding that they had in particular. And it prompted them to think that actually if they had an internal event, then they could share an awful lot of that, distribute it, because knowledge and skills did exist within the company. It just wasn't being shared very well. And they needed a way of distributing that. And so a goal of sharing existing knowledge meant that the format there was very heavy on information sharing. So there were long talks in the morning, which brought expertise into the room, and panel discussions in the afternoon that were kicked off with a shorter, thought-provoking talk from an expert. Alternatively, is it about encouraging democracy, inviting employees to challenge the status quo, breaking those hierarchies that Jamie mentioned earlier? Is it about presenting or inviting alternative views on how the industry or your department could be heading? Or maybe trying to trigger some activity afterwards where groups are maybe trying to seek to address some common problems that they previously thought were just local to their own team. So if it's something like that, if you're trying to shift the agenda, then this might favour more open spaces to stimulate some broader discussion, and perhaps panels to have a good airing to things that might have been rumbling beneath the surface. So as mentioned, the first tech conference, the FT, was triggered by realizing that knowledge wasn't being shared, but it was accompanied by a sense that opinions also weren't being shared as much as they could be. There was a bit of a gap at that point between some of the direction and decision setting management and the employees at the coalface who were doing the work. And so these open spaces and panels were a great starting point for building a sense of collective accountability, for making that workspace and workplace one that people would want to work in. Alternatively, are you just seeking to build connections? I say just, but it's really important. Are you trying to create a break from the day-to-day, social time to geek out with colleagues beyond their own team, to swap ideas, to build social capital, that lubricant that aids collaboration, especially in times of difference or distance? This might favour open spaces or lightning talks, workshops and games. So 2020's conference FT was very much rooted in wanting to build connections. A year of being distributed, disconnected, and for some people lonely. This meant a focus on enabling conversations, and opportunities to just talk was really important. So there was a focus, along with it being online, also meant shorter talks, more open spaces to bring people together, some masterclasses where people could enjoy not just technology, but maybe learning how to whittle was one particular talk, a masterclass that we had, just something different. Or are you looking to celebrate success? So is your goal about shining a spotlight on some awesomeness within the department, or showing off that awesomeness to the rest of the company? If that's the case, then you might favor demos and talks, perhaps training taster sessions. You can teach your CEO to code. At the FT, we found this was a great opportunity to shine a light on some unsung heroes who didn't tend to make it into the regular product release emails that went out. And for them, lightning talks were a good opportunity, and not too intimidating opportunity, to talk about a thing that didn't usually make the headlines. So you might be trying to achieve some or none of those outcomes that I've called out, but deciding what your driver is means that you can design an event that's more likely to achieve them is my main point with all of that. The next thing clearly is to make sure you do plenty of planning. As Matthew said, this takes time. There's maybe more to it than you might realize. If for a physical event, I would certainly say 6 months. If it's an online event, you still need plenty of time, because those speakers need plenty of time to prepare. And if you don't want to stress them out, you need to make sure there's plenty of time given to them. Budget, Matthew also mentioned, think about venue hire, think about travel for remote employee or guest speakers, think about audio visual catering and swag. Of course, online events are cheaper because you don't necessarily have some of those. There's probably no travel, no venue booking, no swag, which is maybe a good thing anyway, because there's less plastic waste involved. But you do still need to think about audio visuals, and there may be some cost there. Do your speakers need some extra technology to boost their presence, some good lighting, a good mic? Also, in terms of food, there's no mass food and drink required, but some people are finding that sending small edible treats to employees can help them feel connected and treated. That can be quite hard to coordinate, but there are companies who can make this easy. One in the UK that I particularly like is called Hug, not just because it's got a lovely name. They also do, they do really nice office team treats, and they take all the pain out of it for you. And just recently I've noticed that they're also assisting the mission for free school meals during lockdown. So kudos to them. I wanted to call them out. There are others, but they're a good company, I think. Also think about the venue. Choosing the venue is really important. For a physical event, this often would determine the date of the event. So choose it early. Consider whether you want it on-site or off-site, one big room, several small ones. That will influence the type of formats that you can use. For online events, it's much more about the environment that your speakers are presenting in. You know, are they in a comfortable, quiet space with good camera, lighting, etc.? Are they practiced at using the tools needed? I'm going to say more about this in a minute, but attracting speakers and then assembling them into a coherent and engaging lineup takes lots of work and mustn't be underestimated. And finally, if you're doing a physical event, you need good food. You want people to enjoy eating the food and mingling and talking about it and not complaining about the pizza running out. So how about some nice breakfast to start the day feeling special, drinks and snacks, a tasty lunch, and remembering to cater for food allergies and having nice alcohol free drinks, etc. And because there's a lot to do, and a lot of that requires a good level of enthusiasm and championing, have the right team do that organising. Find people who are positive, keen to contribute to the department. Maybe it's even those who are quite vocal about trying to seek change, because they will invest personally in getting this right. And as with the speakers, this should be a diverse team. If you want everyone's needs to be considered, then have someone who relates to those needs in the organising team. The third key success factor is quite an obvious one: have some good content and organised well. There are times of day when the energy is high and when it's low. So people's brains are most alert in the morning. So you have longer talks there that need a good attention span. They're tired after lunch when they're digesting food. So keep that a bit lighter and interactive if you can. Lightning talks can be good for re-energizing perhaps at the end of the day. And just make sure you've got plenty of breaks, give people a chance to context switch and be fresh and engaged in the next session. Other than being good for energy levels, varying the types of content and format can just keep it interesting. So try and avoid just being purely technical. As Jamie mentioned, there's a lot of talk about culture. So our engineers are very interested in people around them and the culture of the department and the way that we work. So include topics that represent a broad range of interest in your department, which actually probably doesn't just include engineers. Some people prefer panel discussions. Some just like to listen to a good talk. Some like to engage in a debate. So keeping it varied in terms of format as well as content, that will mean that there's something for everyone. And finally on this, if you want to engage a diverse audience, and you do, then make sure you have a diverse lineup. So that means demographics like gender, race, background, but also think about seniority, role and team. Look for some quieter voices that maybe don't get heard that often, but have something really valuable to say. So you'll have people who like to talk a lot. So do include, involve, celebrate them, but don't let them hog. You'll be ready to do a bit of engineering to get that diverse set of speakers. People need to see people like them talking. At the FT, we manage this. We're quite glad not to have had to turn someone down in order to make space for a less represented voice. Sometimes it means asking someone to make their talk a bit shorter so we can squeeze an extra one in, or inviting people to pair up to give a talk. So it takes a bit of creativity sometimes, but it can easily be done. So the final success criteria I want to call out is really supporting your speakers, because put simply, without them, you don't have an event. They're really important. So be clear on what they have to gain. Make sure you promote that in order to attract and persuade them and coax them to speak. They'll all have their own motivations, but give them some ideas, things like recognition, personal development, and also the chance to really learn more about a thing that they're interested in, because if you're going to talk about it, you need to know it really well, so they can, it's a reason to kind of explore it more. And having your day of varying formats also enables you to accommodate different speaking preferences as well as attendee preferences. Some of your speakers will enjoy hosting a discussion that might be safety in numbers, whereas others will enjoy giving a talk about something that they're really passionate about. Before the event, give them guidelines to help them prepare. Make sure they include technical things like the ratio for the slides and things like that, as well as things to help them remember to breathe, talk slowly. I always need to remind myself that one. Talk slowly, engage with the room, etc. Engage with the screen, which is harder these days. And give them one-to-one support with a buddy, review their slides, let them practice. The FT have got a speaker guild where people can share skills and advice, and they're a great support for new speakers. On the day itself, look out for them early on, check in that they're doing okay, have people who'll guide them on and off with a good luck and a well done, and make sure that the host gives them a proper intro and leads the room in giving them some appreciation. And then after the event as well, check in on them. How did they find it? Did they enjoy it? Did they learn anything? Is there any feedback they want to give about their experience of the event? Because you want them to come away feeling special and supported, so that they volunteer next time and encourage other people to as well. So there's just a quick list of things that I want to call out to avoid, because these are just as important. The first one being, again, know why you're doing this. This is by the people, for the people. Organising, this is hard work. And the best way of motivating your organisers is giving them the freedom to design something that's driven by what attendees want, not to fit a management agenda. Don't leave speaker selection too late. They need lots of time to prepare. And it takes time to even curate that list. Don't forget to feed people. I said that a few times now. It's quite important, especially physical events. Get it right. And don't forget the tag. So whatever format you're doing, whatever tools you're going to use, think about what might go wrong and just rehearse whatever it is you're going to do. How are you going to do polls and interactions? If, for example, if you're doing online talks, do you want to consider them recording them in advance if something, in case the network's at risk or something? And then last but not least, remember that you are doing this for a reason. So make sure it sticks, make sure it ripples, get feedback and follow up on those ideas that you noticed. Some kind of germs of ideas that, if with a bit of encouragement, could fledge into some change that might happen after the event and make it really memorable. And so that's it. Back to Matthew.
Thanks, Victoria. So let's have a quick look at the difference between online versus in-person conferences. This is particularly important now, obviously, because of the pandemic and things, but increasingly organizations are just choosing to do online instead of bringing people together in a physical space. And in the future, there might be a blend of these. The very first one is what some people call Zoom fatigue. So if you're going to a physical conference, you might spend 8 hours in a room or in multiple rooms, listening to lots of talks and so on. You can't do that online. This is Zoom fatigue. You can't have 8 hours worth of Zoom calls. It's just absolutely exhausting. So we can't do that. We need to find an alternative. One option is to have shorter, more frequent events. So perhaps you run the event every 6 months, or maybe you run it every 3 months, but you have it perhaps for half a day, something like this. It's even possible, as we'll see in a few minutes, to have the conference spread out across a week, but to just have 2 hours per day across the week. And that's actually seems to be, there's one option for making it work really, really well. So it allows people to attend without feeling kind of drained and demotivated, because you're not on a Zoom call or whatever for an entire day. One aspect of online conferences that's potentially an advantage really is the live interaction and Q&A. In particular, it's sort of less formal. So if you think about a physical event, there's no one on a physical event, you've got someone on stage, literally higher up than other people. But when we're in an online setting like this, it's somehow more equitable. It's somehow less formal. We're more on the same level, literally. So there's an opportunity for a less formal approach to the conference as well, a bit more chat, discussions and so on. Play around with that and see what people feel could actually be valuable. If you do go for the extra chat and discussions, you do need to make sure you've got good live moderation. You cannot expect the speaker to moderate the chat. The speaker's there to speak and to answer questions. Someone else needs to be doing the moderation. The other things about online that can work really, really well are live captions, for example. So we've got live captions available today in this webinar for those people who want it and need it. So this actually makes online events to some extent potentially more accessible than in-person events. Obviously, in person you can get kind of live captioning things, but the technology at the moment is easy to get hold of using online tools. And particularly if we think about a workforce with people in multiple different countries, if you've got some very different accents, sometimes it's difficult to kind of understand people live. Even for people who are like a native speaker or very well versed in that language, having the live captions on there just helps you to understand, to get over some differences in accent and pronunciation. So that can actually be good for everyone effectively. Crucially though, if we've got all these questions and so on, we've got the opportunity to filter and prioritize some of the chat and comments and things. If you imagine going to a physical event, someone puts their hand up, gets the microphone, starts speaking. Hey, I've got more of a comment than a question. It's usually a guy, right? But so we don't need any of that stuff. You can actually filter that out, and therefore the kind of comments and kind of questions and so on that get answered are much more relevant and much more interesting for the whole room. Here's a quick example of an organization that did really, really well in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is a company called Redgate Software, based in the UK, but they've got other offices in different parts of the world. They had been doing multiple conferences, what they called their conferences Level Up, and they've held these for the last few years in the UK. But they realized, of course, during the pandemic that they couldn't have a physical conference. There was lockdown and so on. So they decided to go ahead and try and run an online conference instead. And they've actually blogged about it here. You can see the link. What they decided to do is to run the conference over a full week. So they run it over 5 days, but just take 2 hours per day. So this is like a really sustainable pace for everyone. And it was a huge success. And they go into the details in this article. I mean, it doesn't surprise me personally that Redgate made a success of this. I had the opportunity of working with them a few years ago, and they've got one of the best company cultures I think I've come across. In their article, they talk about the key learning, the key points that they learned from running this conference online. They could deliver the conference content at a more sustainable pace because they spread it out across a week. So it didn't tire people out. It actually meant they could open up the event to everyone around the world, or all the Redgate people in different countries. Before, if it were a physical event, it'd be very difficult to fly people in. It'd be very expensive. Now, as long as the time zone worked fine, that it could open it up to more people. They could record all the talks much more easily than before. And so you can catch up on that content later on. They could provide something to suit a wider variety of learning styles. Victoria talked about that before. It's good to have different kinds of sessions, whether it's a talk, a workshop, an open space session, panel discussion, and so on. So lots of different kind of learning styles were available because of that, because you can run things in parallel. And in the specific case, during COVID, they could bring their staff together when it was really, really needed. That's one of the key things, for one of the key reasons now for running an internal tech conference, is to make sure that we're taking the opportunity to bring people together and share and learn and reconnect. You'll find more details in the blog post that's linked here. So, quick summary. 4 things. The first one, mentor speakers. Mentor the speakers. Take the time to mentor and prepare the speakers. Give them kind of encouragement and advice and tips, and sometimes they need critical feedback on their talk. Perhaps their slides or their style is not suitable for the talk, or not suitable for the event, or not suitable for the audience. So sometimes people actually need to be kind of helped to see how to improve. A talk effectively is a performance. It needs to be confident and clear and well-timed, and it needs to be relevant to the audience for whom they're speaking. So that's the key starting point, is make sure you've got a plan and a team in place to help mentor the people who are going to speak. Second piece of advice is to do a dress rehearsal. Rehearse this event. We're not talking about in real time necessarily, but it's crucially the transitions between one talk and the next, and the technical aspects, the interludes. Make sure, if you go and have music playing in the background, make sure you know how that's working, and so on. And thirdly, make sure you do the follow-up on the conference. So you need to promote the learning and benefits from that conference. Capture those videos, promote it internally, potentially externally as well, if you want to. But make sure there's a sense of buzz around the fact that it's happened, and people can go back and learn more by rewatching some talks and things like that. The fourth piece of advice we've got is actually just cheat. Don't worry too much about it. Just go ahead and buy the book. Obviously, we're going to say that because we wrote the book, but we've got a whole bunch of stuff in here. We've got templates, checklists, case studies, lots of other guidance, basically to help kind of get you started and streamline the conference, kind of avoiding mistakes, some of the mistakes that we made early on, and then learning from other people as well. Fundamentally, though, you just got to kind of try it and evolve it over time, because the purpose of the conference might change over multiple years. You'll see from the case study in the book around FT that Victoria wrote, the purpose of the conference there actually changed because the organization itself was changing. So it's not a static thing. It's something that's going to evolve. You've got to try these things. Bonus cat photographs from Victoria. And if you do want to buy the book, go ahead there. You can go to internaltechconf.com, and it's available online as an ebook and printed, so Amazon, bookshop.org, book depository, and so on. We actually started writing this book, and it's still available on LeanPub. So just for today, we've got a 25% discount on LeanPub, and there'll be some promo going out about that on Twitter and LinkedIn very shortly. There's some training, as you'd expect. So we've got some live online training and self-paced video coming out soon, which is basically kind of bringing to life the material in the book in an interactive way. And that's it. Have we got time for questions?
Well done.
Yes, we do.
We do have time for questions. Yes, absolutely. We've actually got a good question. So thank you, Victoria, and thank you, Matthew, for that. Now, one of the questions, now, of course, you're bound to get this one, but it is a good question because it's probably on everybody's minds. Is there any way to measure the value of this? Because some leaders will see the cost and then they'll be thinking, is this worth it? Is there any way you can back this with data, or is there any way to evaluate afterwards?
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of stuff in here about making a business case. That is the beginning of chapter 2. There's literally, it says get buy-in from senior management and seller benefits. So some of these things are a bit hard to do in terms of kind of raw numbers. But you can use things like sort of like make sure you do like a survey after the event, like a net promoter score type thing, and you use those kind of techniques. You can simply look at what other people are doing online. I mean, even since we put together the book, there's been additional conferences that have come out with people, organizations talking about the value to their organization. So at one level, it's kind of looking at looking empirically, if you like, looking at examples of what other organizations are doing, and realizing that we probably would get some value out of some kind of event like that. So it's not like the whole thing, it doesn't make sense, but I suppose there's still a question of exactly how much money to spend. And the question there is, well, just start small. Just start something that's really lo-fi. Just do a small event. Just try it in one part of the organization, perhaps. You don't need to buy any fancy equipment to start with. Just try it on a Zoom call or some other kind of technology that you've already got, maybe Microsoft Teams or something like that. And just keep it informal. Just keep it super informal to start with. In terms of the spending on extra technology, make sure that you've done all the mentoring and the preparation. But you don't need to have, it doesn't need to be super polished in terms of the visuals or extra music specially composed for the event. It doesn't need any of that stuff necessarily.
Right,
the first one.
But Matthew, you've answered a different question. You've talked about keeping it small to begin with, but how could people evaluate the value afterwards? Now, I know what you're thinking. How can anybody evaluate when you waste 3 hours in a crap workshop? But so we don't always evaluate meetings. But even if you keep this low-fi and low cost, how would you know afterwards? How would a manager report this up to their board and say, well, actually, that was a good use of our time?
So that's part of the follow-up part here that we talked about, is to make sure we're doing that assessment. We're going around asking people. We might do a survey, internal survey, something like this. Maybe use something like Net Promoter Score that marketing folks use to see whether people would recommend that to their peers afterwards. So eventually we get some sort of metrics out of it. We get the feedback from people, say, actually, this was really, really good, but we wanted more of this next time, or yes, I would recommend it, and I'm keen to speak next time, or something like this. So some sort of survey or questionnaire or feedback from people who attended is essential, basically, for making the case for.
I think in our experience at Container Solutions, we often say, let's say somebody chucks in a meeting for 10 people for 1 hour. This is the equivalent of them picking up a MacBook Air and just stealing it. Right. So you would never let somebody walk out your office with £2,000 worth of goods. So all of a sudden, but yet at the same time, all companies waste lots of money on meetings, but they then resist something new and innovative like an internal tech conference. And then what we see is, unfortunately, you can work out the value of stuff like this, cultural stuff, let's call it, but then with trailing indicators. So when we have a good conference and a good thing at CS in January, then we'll see some returns in our profits in November. And ultimately, that's what managers have to face, is the most important things can often not be measured. Would you share similar insights or similar?
Yeah, I mean, so there's an organization that doing some work for at the moment, and they're finding the move to more cloud native type things a little bit tricky. And so some of the engineers kept a record of the time it was taking them to, I'm not going to say too much, but kind of get something done, which should be automated. And they're having to request something and wait for someone else to configure something for them. So they're just keeping a log of this. And of course, over the course of a week, my goodness, we've actually lost, 5 person days waiting for this thing to be configured. That's kind of crazy. Imagine if we had actually understood how to automate that thing. Well, how would we get the knowledge really quickly? Well, maybe we could bring people together for a learning session, this kind of thing. So you could start to pull together some of the justification for, maybe it's quite a specific learning session initially, and maybe, but start to look at opportunities like that where you can get some kind of top level figures on some of the potential, some of the waste that's happening right now. And you might say, well, look, after a conference like this, we've at least shared knowledge in these areas that would help us shrink the time needed for doing some of that stuff.
We've got a second question as a follow-up to the talk, and I think this one's probably for you, Victoria, maybe with your experience at the FT. Are there any particular tools or platform that you'd recommend to give a better experience for virtual tech conference or remote tech conferences that are internal for large enterprises, for example?
Yeah. Well, the first point would be to try and use whatever you've got. So whatever people are familiar with. So the event itself will be new, and people giving talks will maybe be new to people. So the fewer barriers of new things you have to learn, the better. So if you're used to using Google Meet, then use that, whatever your default thing is. And again, so if you're doing polls, if you're using Google Meet, you might use that because it's built in. If you're not, then there's other polling software out there. And we've tried different ones, but we've tried to keep it as native as possible in terms of the tools that are embedded into the main VC, the call software, so that people aren't switching, because the more you switch between things, the more complicated that gets. So that may not be very much information, but we really did just keep it very simple. I think that's simple with the main thing.
That's definitely the key, isn't it, to keep it simple. Right. Okay. We have another question. If somebody is, let's say they're on the journey, whether it's to become DevOps or cloud native, let's just say more mature, more adult-like as a company, when do internal tech conferences come into play in your experience? Are companies doing it on day one? Are they going to a conference and doing this immediately? Or is this something that happens maybe 1 or 2 years into the journey when communication problems have become obvious, that the existing structures don't help and we need something different?
So I can speak for FT, the journey that it happened there. So the first one we had, there was a recognition that there were some things that possibly needed to be talked about, which might have been a shift to DevOps, which, you know, brings up different feelings in different people depending on where they are. And in order to get to a position where people could talk openly and be ready to embrace certain changes, the first year of the conference was really important, because it started the conversations. It started people being open to, oh, we can have a discussion with our CTO and be having a debate. Oh, we can throw questions at her about certain things and she'll answer them and be ready to discuss them. And it just emboldened people a little bit, so that the following year, then some trickier subjects came up and some bigger conversations and more, you know, perhaps some more difficult things. But starting people getting used to using their voice was really valuable.
So you said at one point they were throwing questions at the CEO?
CTO.
CTO. Last time I spoke at a Container Solutions events, they were throwing things at me. That's a different story. Now, another question. It seemed to me, or seemed to the person asking the question, a lot of this advice would be good advice for any conferences. Is that a fair comment?
I think it's a fair comment. I mean, so some of the experience that we've pulled in here is through my experience in running meetup events, and particularly Pipeline Conference, which ran for 5 years in London and was very well received. So yes, I mean, our specific expertise, if you like, our specific focus was around tech conferences, because it's the technology, particularly in the kind of cloud space, which is changing so rapidly. I mean, other technology in other places, IoT and even agriculture and healthcare and so on, is also changing, but it's cloud native stuff which is kind of pulling all of that, is leading the way in the technology. So we really find an urgent need to have this kind of bringing together for learning when we're working in and around technology. But yes, all this stuff, to be honest, pretty much is going to apply to any context where things are changing quickly and people need to continue to learn on an ongoing basis and share things with each other. Yeah.
Very good. Now, are there any more questions? At this point in the webinar, we usually ask if there are any brave souls who are willing to unmute themselves and actually say hello, introduce themselves, and ask a question. So that's that moment. Is there anybody who has got anything else for Victoria or Matthew? Everybody's a bit shy. You can also just send me a direct message on Zoom if you prefer.
Now, I don't have any questions because that was genuinely brilliant. I had a couple of issues as I was listening to it, but they've been answered. So I just wanted to say, as an audience member, I hugely enjoyed that. Thank you ever so much.
Oh, very good. Very nice compliment. There you go. You don't get that at other webinars. Tell your friends.
No, I'd agree with Paul's comment. If I had it was a quick question about kind of what might come next, whether either Victoria or Matthew got experience of people then going on to do public conferences as a consequence of doing internal conferences.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, we haven't mentioned it today, but that definitely happens. It's the internal tech conference is a kind of almost like a proving ground that then as people get familiar with and confident with talking about technology and talking about how they did things and so on. And then, well, the next step could be, well, I'm going to pitch to a major international or national or international conference and talk about the stuff we've been doing inside our organization. So suddenly your internal tech conference becomes like an incubator for sharing awareness about the entire organization in a public forum, which is kind of amazing, because then suddenly you're representing that organization and promoting what's happening in there. So it's a really good point. And yes, that definitely happens.
Well, I suppose in a way, all businesses, and certainly cloud native businesses, become leadership factories, don't they? Because you are pushed in to do things that you might not usually do at that point in your career, whether that's making your own decisions, giving upward feedback, or addressing an audience in public. So surely an internal tech conference is continued leadership training for anybody who's got the guts to stand up and speak at one. And then surely that will be the next thing for your career, to go public with such talks.
Yeah, I mean, leadership, but also just also doesn't necessarily have to be kind of leadership in terms of management. It can also be leadership in terms of kind of a practitioner, maybe like engineer or whatever, project manager or something. So you can still be kind of leading the practice in your area without it being just about kind of different levels of management. But yeah, both.
Oh yeah, sorry, Matthew. When I said leadership, I didn't necessarily.
I know.
In a management position, I meant because at Container Solutions, we want our people to all develop their soft skills and leadership skills. And meetups and public speaking are one way many engineers at CS move into that sort of, or practice their communication skills.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any parting words or any further questions? I think all we need to do now is wrap these things up, but we're going to start at the top and we're going to say a big thank you to Carla. You can unmute yourselves now, people, for the round of applause. Thank you to Carla, my partner in crime at Container Solutions. If we didn't do her job, these events would never happen. With that in mind, keep it going, keep it going. Thank you to Teresa, also from Container Solutions, for organising, to Adrian Moa, Ian Mile, and of course, our fantastic guests, Matthew and Victoria. Send us your feedback. But for now, thank you very much. And we hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
See you.
We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.